everyone. Hope you're doing well. I'm pleased to be joined by our sort of favourite football finance correspondent, Kieran. How are you doing?
I'm good. The world of lunatics that is football club ownership are keeping me fairly busy with Sheffield Wednesday, Reading, what's happening at Everton, Scunthorpe, Southend. There's a never-ending list of people who seem to have bought football clubs with no idea either what they've bought or what they're trying to do. And you've got things like the Glazers as well at Manchester United. So never dull and never quiet.
I know Scunthorpe as well. They're in the headlines the last week or so, Scunthorpe. So they're their own basket case as well. So I've been keeping an eye on things like that too. And for once, it's not West Ham. Usually it's West Ham. Usually when you say that piece there, you're referring to David Sullivan in the past. But for once, we're actually sort of keeping out the headlines for the right reasons.
Yes, they seem to be just getting on with things, letting David Moyes coach the club, and sometimes being dull and boring is good. You don't want too many crises in your life. So, they had a fantastic season last year, winning the conference, and that must have been a great day for all West Ham fans. And they're just sort of moving on quietly. And that's to be welcomed. It's good to not be in the headlines. You know, I'm a Brighton fan. We had a couple of weeks in the headlines, and then we went back to being rubbish. So you don't want to get your hopes built up too high too quickly.
Yeah, I want to take a look back, actually. Not to last weekend at Villa Park. Beyond that, back to the summer. There was a lot of made out of West Ham in financial fair play, and there was a sort of a pressure on West Ham to sell Declan Rice for a particular amount of money with a particular structure of payments. And for those subscribers that perhaps aren't too clued up or aren't too sure how it works, can we start with the Declan Rice thing? Why was it important that West Ham got 3 payments of 33 million rather than 5 payments of 20 million?
Well, from an FFP point of view, it made absolutely zero difference. Because FSP is ultimately based on the final fee rather than the cash flow. As far as West Ham are concerned, they have historically, along with the vast majority of clubs, bought players using the club credit card, for want of a better phrase. So they owed other clubs £81 million in outstanding transfer fees. Now, it could be that some of those transfer fee payments were coming up in the near future. So therefore, they effectively wanted to match money coming in from the sale of Declan Rice to their financial commitments. But they're in a pretty good financial situation. Yeah, they've got cash in the bank. There are plenty of cash in the bank. So I found it a little bit tricky. Apart from saying that you'd rather have money sooner than later, like everybody else, especially with inflation, the way that it is. So if you've got inflation at 5-10%, then the value of that money is declining. So there's sort of broad economic reasons for wanting the money sooner rather than later. But there was no desperate need. We're aware that some clubs need to sell players and need to get a big down payment on the player sale in that first instalment because they can't pay the outstanding money owed to HMRC or they need to go and pay this month's wages. And if that is the case, then normally the buying club takes advantage of that in terms of the fee. But West Ham aren't. West Ham's finances are pretty solid.
That's interesting then. So when it comes to sort of financial fair play, they're not going to look at the Declan Rice sale as 33 million this season, 33 million next season, 33. It's 100 million this season, and that's it.
Yeah, it's always based on the agreed fee. Ultimately, a transfer fee is a compensation fee. Declan Rice was under contract at West Ham United Football Club, and nobody else was entitled to use his services. So therefore, in order to persuade West Ham to give up their rights to the player, somebody had to go and pay them a lot of compensation, and that club was Arsenal. And once you've agreed that fee, all of the profit from that deal goes into this year's FFP calculation, regardless of the cash flow structure in terms of payments.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to go off topic of West Ham for 1 minute then, just for like using another case, which is obviously Chelsea. When Todd Bowley came in, he started signing players on 8-year contracts, and there was a sort of understanding. And to be honest with you, I'm one of these people, Kieran. I'm learning something here. I thought that's why we needed the Rice money in 3 installments. So I thought with the Chelsea thing, the reason they were doing that was so that, to keep it simple, an 80 million transfer fee over an 8-year contract will get split into 8 times 10 rather than one big lump sum. So why are Chelsea doing it like that then? Is it just to tie down a young player to a long contract?
Right. We looked at West Ham from the point of view of the selling club.
Yeah.
So as far as West Ham are concerned, they've got £105 million worth of profit from the sale of Declan Rice. That goes into this year's FFP calculation, regardless of whether Arsenal pay in 1 instalment, 3 instalments, or 5 instalments.
Okay.
When it comes to buying a player, it does matter in terms of not the installments, but the life of the contract. Because you rightly said, if you sign a player for £80 million on an 8-year contract, for FFP purposes, you say, well, 80 divided by 8, it's costing us £10 million a year. And if you put those two things together, you get this rather ludicrous situation that we have at Chelsea. So Chelsea sold Mason Mount to Manchester United for 60 million. He came through the academy, so he cost them nothing. So your FFP profit on the deal was 60 million. Now, if you are signing players for £80 million on 8-year contract, that allows you to sign 6 players coming in on £80 million for one sale of Mason Mount. That's really spectacularly stupid, but that's the way that the accounting works. And that's what Chelsea have done. They've taken advantage of the weirdness of the financial rules. And that's why we've seen a pushback from UEFA from the 1st of July, which has said, well, for FFP purposes going forwards, we're going to limit it to 5 years if you do sign a player. But all of those players that Chelsea signed before the 1st of July, they've managed to take advantage of the softness of the rules.
Interesting. I'm learning stuff. I like this. Right, just one quick case then, because you've used Declan Rice and Mason Mount, 2 academy players, as an example of selling, so it's pure profit. But what happens if, in theory, you buy a player for 20 million, sell him for 40? Do you then get 20 million in profit, or do you get the sale of 40 million? Which one do you then use?
Right. This is a bit early for FFP maths, but what you do is you say, what is the book value of the player? So let's say that you signed that player for 20 million and he's on a 4-year contract. So therefore he's costing you 5 million a year.
Yeah.
And if you sell him after 2 years, you say, well, we bought him for 20. We've got two years worth of cost going in. So 2 times 5 is 10. So now his book value is 10 million. You sell him for 40. So what you do is you compare the sale price of 40 to the book value of 10, and you'd book an FFP profit of 30 million. And this is what clubs are doing. So that's why clubs are now so desperate to sell their academy players. You saw Chelsea trying to push Conor Gallagher out of the door over the course of the summer. And if you take a look at the players that they did sell, Mason Mount was 60 million of profit. They've sold Tomori, they've sold Tammy Abrahams, they've sold Ruben Loftus-Cheeks, they've sold Hudson-Odoi. All of those are academy players, and all of those are pure profit, which allows them to go in and spend these £1 billion on players. And people are going, well, how on earth do they do that? But the academy players are like gold dust from an FFP point of view.
This is fascinating. I'm loving this. I'm thinking of Man City when you're talking about that. I'm thinking of Man City. They're selling quite a lot of their youngsters with release clauses. This makes even more sense why they're willing to let these academy players go, because it's sort of pure profit, isn't it? Okay, this is interesting. Right, I've got you for 5 more minutes. Let's get back to West Ham. In the summer, a lot was made of being on UEFA's FFP watch list. Is that something we should be worried about, or is it just a bit of administration?
FFP during COVID was effectively frozen. UEFA said these are exceptional times in which we're living. So we're going to be slightly more relaxed with regards to imposing sanctions on clubs who are either close to or theoretically have gone through the rules, but we're going to allow them a bit of pushback in terms of lost gate receipts, the increased costs of running the club during COVID. Players were being tested. They weren't being tested using the NHS because I think the clubs and I think the weight of public opinion would have been, this doesn't look too clever. But even simple things like if you were going to an away game, what the clubs were doing, normally you'd either all fly together, but there were no flights, or you'd go in the coach together. Well, the last thing you want to do is to risk one player having COVID and transferring it to the rest of the team. So therefore, what they were doing, they were putting that there's sort of no more than 3 players were going into people carriers to try to reduce the risk. All of that increased the costs of running a club. So UEFA said, right, we're going to give you some allowances. West Ham, because they qualified for Europe, of course, in 22, 23, and so on, they are subject to UEFA's FFP rules. And under UEFA's FFP rules, you're only allowed to lose 30 million euro over 3 years, as opposed to 105 million for the Premier League. So West Ham, well within the Premier League rules, but they were that much closer to the limit. So UEFA said, look, guys, we're not going to make an example of anybody due to COVID, but you just need to be a little bit cautious. And that's why they went on the watch list along with Chelsea. I think Manchester City might have been there. Rangers were there. There was a list, I think it's something like 28 different clubs in Europe. UEFA has many faults, but it genuinely doesn't want to kick out some of its senior clubs who are there on merit, of course, from its competition, because it devalues the competition and it upsets fans. But you can't go mad in the transfer market and just bear this in mind.
I know it's difficult for you, sort of outside of looking in. I know you do your best to keep your eye on things, but in regards to West Ham in terms of spending, I think you were suggesting it was a little bit OTT that West Ham were going to have to be careful with FFP, and actually they had some money they could spend, and that was before any transfer activity took place. So it felt like a little bit maybe the press were making a mountain out of a molehill, which would be unusual of them, in particular.
Well, yeah. The media have got a job to do, and they're looking for clicks, and something like that, rightly or wrongly, generates a lot of fan interest and interaction in terms of social media. And West Ham are not alone. The vast majority of clubs need to sell a player or two each summer to effectively release funds. First of all, it releases wages funds going forwards. And secondly, you've got the potential for making some profits, which can then be utilised for FFP. So I think all the press were saying, although they made it sound more dramatic than it was, that you can't sign Mbappe, Messi and Neymar this summer, guys. But there was no intention of that happening anyway. West Ham, under Kieran Brady, and I appreciate Kieran Brady can be a divisive figure amongst West Ham fans, they do operate a fairly tight ship because they don't want, David Sullivan is now at the stage, he doesn't want to put money into the club. So therefore he wants it to be sustainable. They've got the benefit of the deal with the London Stadium, which I think is certainly beneficial towards West Ham. So all of those things are in favour of the club. And I've always said, people moan about the London Stadium deal. It's a fantastic deal for West Ham United Football Club as a business. And I think fans, you're a regular. I go there once a year as an away fan. I think it is now starting to come a bit more like home, and sort of some of the resentment towards perhaps what was felt to be broken promises by the owners doesn't apply to the same extent.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do feel that anyway from our subscribers. And I was speaking to a couple of people this season. They were saying that it feels a bit more like, maybe not quite like, well, nowhere near like Upton Park. But certainly it's getting more and more West Ham, if you like, every week. Well, listen, Kieran, I don't want to keep you any longer. I know you've got a really busy day. Like you said, there's lunatics everywhere keeping you busy. So I really appreciate you popping on. And I've learned a lot actually out of that, because I was one of the people that thought it was important to sell Rice this way in order for us to adhere to FFP regulations. So that's very, very interesting, actually. I've discovered a lot. And some of the videos I've done this summer are now incorrect. But thank you very much, Kieran. I really appreciate it. If you guys at home have enjoyed it, please do drop a like on Sky New Times chat. You want to hear more from Kieran, I'll drop his Twitter account handle in the description below, as well as a link to the Price of Football podcast, where you can keep up to date with all the latest gossip and news in and around football finances, including some of the lunatics that Kieran already mentioned. We'll catch you in a bit.
Cheers, guys.